Hey you guys, welcome back to Confidence and Coffee. Today is a very special day and a very, very special episode. I am going to dedicate this episode of Confidence and Coffee of Confidence is an Inside Job book for you. I am so excited for what you're about to dive into, and I can only pray that it resonates with you and you want to read the rest of the book, because you are going to find something that will shake up culture, church culture, the culture that we live in that lives in fear of being transparent and vulnerable, afraid that their flaws won't be accepted, or maybe we see flaws we call red flags in others and we stay away in distance, and then we live a lonely life. I've done all of the things so you can not have to. And if you already have, there's hope, and if anything, you're not alone. Get comfortable wherever you are to dive into this episode. Know that if it did resonate with you, obviously leave a rating, a review. I'll pause for a second while you subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave a comment telling me how valuable the podcast has been for you. Tag me in what you listen to so I can share it with you. And at the end of this episode, if this episode brought you any kind of value, I will go ahead and drop a link to order the book wherever you get books. It could be Barnes & Noble, Goodreads, Amazon, Target, Walmart, all the places, Powell's, and order your copy today, which is available. Let me know where you're at in your journey to confidence and what God's called you to do, because you're called. You have a purpose. The enemy knows that, and it's time to walk in it unapologetically as yourself, not based off circumstances, but based off your connection to Christ. I love you, so let's go ahead and get into today's episode.
Part 1. Confidence 101. Chapter 1. Why do we care so much? This is what the Lord says. Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. Jeremiah 6:16, NIV. It was the first day of kindergarten. I was in my favorite pink dress and the cutest white high-top tennis shoes, which I had to beg my mom for because they were white, and she absolutely knew they wouldn't come home that way. She was right. My hair was pulled back into pigtails, my favorite style, because my grandma always told me how cute I looked when my hair was that way. Precocious was the word most adults used to describe me, which just meant loud and in charge. I was a force to be reckoned with wherever I went. Too much is what my dad would say. Ashley, remember, when you get into class today, just don't be too much. Tone it down. Don't draw too much attention to yourself if you want the other kids to like you. That was Dad, though, always telling me to take it down a notch. It's safe to say my big personality was not his favorite thing about me. But the second I entered the classroom, Dad's advice went right out the window. I walked in on top of the world. Confidence was never a problem for me back then. And on this particular day, I felt especially pretty. I quickly sized up the other kids, making eye contact right away with girls and boys who seemed like best friend material. "Hi, I'm Ashley," I'd say, a little too loudly and a little too close to their faces. Later that morning, my teacher announced we were going to make a fun project for our first day of school by drawing a life-size picture of ourselves. She gave each of us a large piece of white butcher paper, and then she paired us with a partner who would draw our outline while we were lying on the floor. The girl I was paired with rolled her eyes and whispered to her friend next to her. They both looked in my direction and giggled. I wondered what was so funny and hoped she'd tell me while we were working together. I traced her outline first, taking extra special care to get it just right. Then it was her turn. She traced me, giggling again as she tried to outline around my pigtails and the flare of my dress. She didn't talk much, but her silence didn't bother me. I could easily carry any conversation by myself. Once we were finished with the tracings and added details, Everyone laughed as they looked at their classmates' drawings. My boys have each made one of these outlines on their first day of kindergarten, and I imagine you and your kiddos might have done one as well. So you know what they look like. The phrase, Picasso goes to kindergarten, comes to mind. I looked at my finished drawing and felt such pride in my work. Did I look silly? Absolutely. We all did. But my tracing partner and her friends seemed to be especially interested in pointing out everything wrong with my picture, which was obviously a stand-in for my actual appearance. My pigtails were too babyish. My dress was too fancy, and who wears tennis shoes with a dress? Can you tell this was the 90s and not the 2020s? It was the first time that I really remember caring about what someone else thought about me. And I remember how it made me feel. Panicky. Heat flooded my cheeks. My breath came in spurts. My heart was beating out of my chest. My thoughts started spinning a million miles an hour, jumbling together as I tried to figure out how in the world I was going to make friends with these girls and what I might have to change about myself to do it. This was in kindergarten, y'all. My heart breaks for little 5-year-old me. When I, thankfully, got off the bus that afternoon, I ran straight into my mom's arms and cried. "They don't like me and I don't know why," I moaned into her shoulder. I don't remember what she said to comfort me. I'm sure it was something moms say to comfort little hearts, but I never forgotten that day or the pain of those girls' words. So I vowed from that day forward, I would do whatever it took for those girls not to just like me, but to love me. People-pleasing 101. The need to feel liked, accepted, included starts when we're young, doesn't it? In reality, searching for acceptance starts way before we head off to kindergarten, long before the influence of friends or social media. From our earliest ages, we begin to adjust our behaviors based on what we sense as pleasure and displeasure from others. How do I know? I've seen it in my children from the time they were little. Ever played the throw it on the floor game with a baby in a high chair? They throw something on the floor. You laugh, pick up what they tossed, set it back on the high chair, and what do? They throw it on the floor again, right? The more you laugh, the more they sense your approval, and they keep throwing the object on the floor. Of course, it's not so funny when things escalate and they throw their bowl of oatmeal on the floor, but the whole interaction is based on the good feelings they get from pleasing you. We are encouraged by the praise of others. That encouragement feeds us in a way that triggers all kinds of happy brain chemicals, and we start to chase praise when we're very, very young. It's not something we ever really outgrow, and there's a reason for that. We were never intended to outgrow our desire to be accepted, because God made us that way. From the moment God created Adam, he was pleased. And then when God saw that Adam needed companionship, he created Eve. And he was pleased with her too. In fact, the Bible tells us that God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. Genesis 1:31 NIV. The Bible doesn't talk a lot about what Adam and Eve were thinking in those early days in the garden. But since we still talk about the Garden of Eden today as a place of paradise, I'd like to think that in that perfect place, Adam and Eve were happy and content. They were in a relationship with God and with each other, and there were no outside forces compelling them to pull away from one another. But that didn't last forever, did it? You know the story. The serpent convinced Eve to eat fruit from the one tree in the garden God told her not to eat from. Satan convinced her to eat that fruit by making her feel like something was missing in her life, something God didn't want her to have. Once she'd eaten the fruit, she convinced Adam to eat it too. Perhaps without thinking of the consequences, Adam and Eve decided to separate themselves from God. And God decided to show this separation physically by banishing Adam and Eve from the perfect paradise he'd made. Oh man, the lessons we can take away from one little, but oh so huge story. First, when I said that people-pleasing has been around for a while, I wasn't kidding. This is the story of the very beginning of human history, and it's about people-pleasing. So don't feel bad if you struggle with trying to make everyone around you feel happy, because humans have been struggling with it literally since the dawn of time. Adam cared a lot about pleasing Eve, and why wouldn't he? She was his wife, his BFF. They were thick as thieves in the garden. But here's the problem. When he decided to take that fruit from Eve, he cared more about pleasing his wife than he cared about pleasing God. And God doesn't make his rules in a because I said so sort of way. He doesn't need us to obey him for an ego boost. I mean, he's God. He can do what he wants. He makes these rules because he knows what's best for us. He created guidelines because he knew we'd need them, like instructions in a recipe. Adam and Eve decided they didn't really need the instructions, and we're going to start making decisions without God. And you know what? It isn't hard to see that acting against our own best interest, like, listening to what God has for us, to please someone else can quickly backfire. And backfire it did. And that's really the problem with people-pleasing. Making others happy feels good. Meeting the needs of others feels good. When others approve of us, we feel good. But honestly, working so hard to please other people is a bit short-sighted. Because what feels good in the moment isn't always good for us in the long run. When we believe that pleasing other people is the only way to contentment and the only way we're worthy of love, belonging, that's a big fat lie from Satan. A lie that's easy to believe, clearly. But hold on, Ashley, you may be thinking. Am I just supposed to make people mad all the time? How am I going to have any friends if I'm just ticking people off? How are my loved ones going to continue talking to me if I don't do anything that makes them happy? Okay, valid question. I get why you're asking it. Who wants to be a Debbie Downer? Who keeps to herself and doesn't laugh or do anything fun with anybody? No one, that's who. And that's not what I'm telling you to do here. Sharing joy with other people is one of the best parts of connection. There's a reason Proverbs says, "A joyful heart is good medicine." 17:22 ESV. So rest assured, I'm not telling you that doing something kind for someone else, whether it's baking spider cookies for the neighborhood Halloween party or watching your friend's kids one night when she asks, is bad, and you're doing something wrong. Absolutely not. But what I am saying is that there's a difference between giving of yourself in a healthy way that brings joy, connection, and flourishing to a relationship, and the not-so-healthy giving of yourself that has you believing that your contribution to someone else is the only thing that brings you worthiness as a human being. And when you believe that your worth comes from your actions, well, that's a recipe for resentment, anxiety, and burnout at best. At worst, it puts you on a path that leads away from God's mercy and love, which contribute so much to the person He wants you to be. So, how do you know if you're making a decision to be kind to someone else and contribute to a group, or if you're spiraling into some self-destructive people-pleasing? Here are a few red flags to look for. Have you ever made a decision you knew was the wrong one, but you didn't want to hurt someone else's feelings by going in another direction? Have you ever stopped yourself from communicating any hurt or anger you feel because you just wanted to keep the peace? Do you ever feel like you need the praise of your friends to feel good about yourself? Have you ever apologized for something you didn't do because it was easier than continuing the argument? Have you ever felt loved or unloved based on the number of likes or comments you received on a social media post? Ouch, that one hurt a little. These are all signs that you might be making decisions from a people-pleasing place. And you know something? Even when we're aware that making choices to please others instead of God isn't great for us because it takes away our flourishing, we still wonder time and again, what will other people think of me if I do or don't do this? Did you just feel a shot of adrenaline in your veins? I did too. Because even though I know I'm not supposed to care what other people think about me, I do. I very much do. It's something I struggle with a lot, and I bet you might too. It's okay, sis. You're not alone here. But you may be wondering why we struggle so much with that. Well, it's because we all have a very deep need to be needed and known. Needed and known. Abraham Maslow, renowned psychologist, developed what has come to be known as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This hierarchy tries to explain how our needs drive our choices and behavior. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is often shown as a pyramid graphic with the most basic needs, like food, safety, and love, toward the bottom of the pyramid, and the highest need, which he called self-actualization, at the top. I don't think Maslow gets nearly enough credit for his theory. I mean, I know people are aware of the hierarchy of needs, but we should have given this man all the prizes, because so many of our choices can be explained by this one simple pyramid. And lucky for you, we're going to nerd out and break it down because this is some fascinating stuff. At the bottom of the pyramid are the basics of what we humans need: food, water, shelter, sleep, things like that. At the very least, we need these things to function. If we don't have these things, we die. So first and foremost, we base our decisions on whether we have the necessities of life. Once we have our basic needs met, we turn to safety. And in this stage, we find stability, which brings an order and calm to our days. We have a job that helps us pay our bills, and we focus on personal care, like going to the doctor, moving our bodies, getting haircuts, and buying clothes. These things are also important. Then, when our lives feel safe and stable, we can start making our decisions based on the next tier: emotional needs. In this tier, we have love and belonging. We thrive on connection, so we need strong relationships with other people. Humans figured out pretty early on that we survive a bit better out in the wild when we work together because someone else has skills that we don't, and vice versa. But we're also just happier when we have strong relationships. And we all know that happiness has a strong correlation to resilience and our ability to survive harsh circumstances a bit longer. After relationships with others, we move on to the esteem tier. How much do we respect ourselves? How much do we trust ourselves? Maslow's explanation of this tier also includes the esteem we receive from others, or rather, how other people regard us based on what we've done. Do other people respect us? Do they acknowledge our efforts? Spoiler alert, this is the tier where confidence comes into play, and we'll get to that later. Finally, if we have all our physical needs and emotional needs met, then we ascend to what Maslow called self-actualization. That's where we put all the puzzle pieces together and start to reach our potential. I like to think of it as being my best self, filled with purpose as I walk toward fulfilling my mission on this earth. So, what does this have to do with the chapter called Why Do We Care So Much? Look with me for a sec. Maslow put the esteem tier above the love and belonging tier. Both are important. That's why they're there. But to get to a place of self-actualization, when we're walking in purpose and on mission, we've got to master the esteem tier. And that means we need to like who we are and trust ourselves to act in ways that align with our faith, our values, and our flourishing. That's when we're confident in ourselves. But to get to the confidence tier, aka the esteem tier, we must first master our relationships with other people. And here's the thing you need to know about relationships. God created us to be connected to other people. Remember in the garden when God said it wasn't good for Adam to be alone? I wonder if God knew that Adam had a desire to be needed by someone else. Not just wanted, but needed. But God doesn't need anyone. So he filled Adam's desire by creating Eve. #woman power. It's the same for us. God created us to be needed and known. I remember the first time I heard someone say those words. I was watching a church service, and the pastor said that beyond food, water, and shelter, the two things humans need most are to be needed and known. He's kind of right. Just glance over at the hierarchy of needs. His words immediately resonated with me, awakening something deep inside of me that felt so true. I do need to be needed and known by someone, and for something, I need to matter to someone. In his message, the pastor related our desire to be needed and known to our God-given desire to have a purpose, to feel like we were created for something and for someone. But we have to examine our motivations behind this desire. When the Holy Spirit stirs our souls and says, I gave you strengths and gifts for a reason, for my kingdom. Now get out there and use them. That's a healthy kind of motivation. But just like with anything else, the enemy can also use that stirring to make us want to be needed and known in an unhealthy way. Thinking back to earlier in the chapter, because I love a good callback, I believe Satan used Eve's desire for more in the garden. Because the serpent said to her, God knows that when you eat the forbidden fruit, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Genesis 3:5 NIV. When the serpent said this, perhaps Eve heard, you were created for more than this garden. Think about it. If you have knowledge of good and evil, you'll be like God. And doesn't God want that for you? Isn't that the goal, to be more like him? I bet he wants that for Adam too. You'd be helping him. Go on, take it, eat it. That's the lie. That God needed Eve to help him. So she did. She ate it. And from that day forward, humans have struggled to remember that the only way to feel fulfilled is to believe we are wanted and known by our God rather than working to be needed by God or our people. We want to be needed and known by someone. It's just human nature. In kindergarten, I wanted to be needed and known by the mean girls who made fun of my drawing. In middle school, I wanted to be needed and known by a group, any group. I wanted to feel good about myself, and the way to do that was by their approval. And to gain their approval, I transformed myself into whoever I needed to be so I could be accepted. It didn't matter if they were doing things I knew were wrong. If I was going to be approved by them, I had to do those things too. By high school, my home life had exploded, and my only need was to feel loved. I gave my heart and my body to anyone who would help me feel that way. By the time I was a wife and mom with 3 kids and another one on the way, I had no idea who I was. Was I the unloved girl? The popular girl? The girl who needed attention? I had no identity of my own, and I constantly looked to others to tell me who Ashley really was. Perhaps you've been there too. Lost, lonely, caring way too much what others think of you, and exhausted from trying to please everyone. Sis, I can promise you this. You don't have to stay there. Breathe, cry, feel seen, and know it's okay to want to be loved. It's okay to admit that you want to be liked by others, that you want to find belonging with other people. So how do we have healthy relationships with others? where we're needed and known by them, while also making decisions that honor our values, our faith, and our flourishing? How do we have strong connections with others without people pleasing and instead trust ourselves enough to walk with purpose on the path God has for us? I found the answer to those questions is confidence. Building your confidence. Did you know that when you write something down, you're using a part of your brain that's linked to a memory? That means when you write your thoughts or things you're learning, you're more likely to remember them. It's like puzzle pieces start to click in your brain. Pretty cool, right? So here's what we're going to do. At the end of each chapter, I'm going to invite you to think about what we talked about and give you a sec to practice some of the ideas. You don't have to show this to anybody or even tell them what you're doing. This is a zero pressure way to get some of your observations down on paper and think about how you want to show up in the world. It's almost like you're visualizing who you want to be. And before you know it, what you practice on these pages will make its way into your everyday actions. Think of these as some baby steps towards building your confidence. The foundation. Confidence comes when we like who we are and trust ourselves to act in ways that align with our faith, our values, and our flourishing. We're wired to please from our earliest ages, but we often misdirect this desire to please away from God, who has our best interest at heart, to other people, who maybe have motives that are a little less altruistic. Why does pleasing God matter? Because He wants us to flourish. And He set out principles for us to follow so that we can reach that place of flourishing. Having healthy relationships with others while staying true to our values is possible through real confidence. The tools. Spotting the red flags of people-pleasing. Wanting to be needed and known by others is okay. But when you're in a relationship with someone and wondering if you're acting out of a place of health or people-pleasing, look for red flags that show your focus is on the outside instead of the inside. Are you going along with someone else just to get along? Are you squashing the hurt you feel because you want to keep the peace? Are you apologizing for things that aren't your fault? Do you feel like you need someone else's praise to feel good about yourself for what you've done? The build. Do you think the person you are on the inside matches the person you are on the outside? Why or why not? Think back to a time when you molded yourself to fit someone else's expectations. How did you feel in that scenario? Think about how your body reacted to that moment. Shortness of breath, sweaty palms, racing heart. Now think about releasing that need to change yourself. How does your body feel? Take a look at the hierarchy of needs. Which tiers do you feel like you've mastered? Which tiers do you struggle with most? What might be the obstacle or obstacles keeping you there? Is there someone who helps you feel like the real you? Why and how do you think they're able to do that?
I hope that you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for listening. Confidence in Coffee was born in 2019, right before I had my daughter, and then postpartum hit, and here we are again. This podcast has had so many names, but Confidence in Coffee is here to stay. I just am so grateful for the community of listeners that have been with me since that time and have watched the podcast evolve into what it is now. Now I need your help. I need you to share the podcast. I need you to leave those ratings, those reviews, if it has brought you value, so we can get it pushed up and we can get it pushed out to others that need to hear the discussions and conversations that we're having on this podcast. Maybe they need to laugh, maybe they need to cry, whatever it is. This is where we have real, honest conversations. We're not afraid to cross the line so that others might get to know Christ. I'm so grateful that you've been a part of that. So I'll catch you next Tuesday on Confidence in Coffee. Thanks again for listening.